The classroom was silent, except for the soft scratching of pencils on paper. Mrs. Aisha, a dedicated and compassionate teacher, walked between the rows of desks, stopping every now and then to check on her students' work. Teaching had always been her passion, and for her, every student deserved a chance, regardless of their financial background. But not everyone shared her beliefs. Have you ever wondered what happens when doing the right thing costs you everything? What if helping someone in need led to your downfall? That's exactly what happened to Mrs. Aisha when she decided to help a struggling student, only to find herself unemployed and shunned. It all started with a boy named Hamza. He was quiet, intelligent, and eager to learn, but his torn uniform and empty lunchbox told a different story. Unlike his classmates, who came from well-off families, Hamza came from a poor household. His parents could barely afford his school fees, and he often showed up hungry, struggling to concentrate. Aisha couldn't ignore it. She began helping him in small ways, buying him lunch, giving him extra books, and even paying part of his fees in secret. She never expected anyone to notice. But when the school administration found out, everything changed. She was called into the principal's office and accused of breaking school policies. The administration believed in maintaining a certain standard, and helping a poor student didn't align with their image. Despite her years of service and dedication, she was fired on the spot. Heartbroken and humiliated, Aisha walked out of the school gates with nothing but her handbag and a heavy heart. She had done the right thing, but at what cost? Little did she know her act of kindness had set something in motion, something that would change her life forever. Aisha had always believed that teaching was more than just a job. It was a responsibility. For over a decade, she had dedicated her life to shaping young minds, not just with knowledge, but with kindness and empathy. Born into a middle-class family, Aisha knew the value of education. Her parents had struggled to give her the best schooling they could afford, and she had worked hard to achieve her dream of becoming a teacher. She wanted to be the kind of teacher who inspired students, the kind who made a difference. That's why, when she first met Hamza, she couldn't turn a blind eye. Hamza was different from the other students. While most kids complained about homework or talked about their new gadgets, he sat quietly at his desk, focusing on his studies. He rarely spoke unless called upon, but his answers were always thoughtful and intelligent. Aisha soon realized why he kept to himself. He was struggling in ways his classmates couldn't understand. His uniform was old and worn, the fabric thin from too many washes. Some days he didn't bring lunch, pretending he wasn't hungry. He never had new stationery, borrowing pencils from classmates or writing in the margins of used notebooks. One day, after class, Aisha found him sitting alone in the schoolyard, staring at his empty lunchbox. She sat beside him and gently asked, "Hamza, is everything okay?" At first he hesitated, but after some encouragement, he finally spoke. "My father lost his job. My mother does sewing work, but it's not enough. We can barely afford food, let alone school fees." Aisha's heart ached. She knew the school was strict about fees, and students who failed to pay were often expelled. The thought of Hamza being forced to leave over money felt deeply unfair. That evening, Aisha made a decision. She would help him. She started by quietly paying part of his school fees, ensuring he wouldn't be sent home. She brought him extra books and supplies, telling him they were spare from the school storage. Some days, she packed extra lunch and casually handed it to him, saying, "I made too much today. Would you help me finish it?" Hamza's gratitude was evident in his eyes, but he never took advantage of her kindness. He continued to study hard, and Aisha was proud of him. However, the school administration did not share her compassion. One afternoon, the principal, Mr. Farouk, called her into his office. As she entered, she noticed the stern expressions on the faces of the school board members. She felt a sense of unease. "Miss Aisha," Mr. Farouk said coldly, "we have received reports that you have been financially assisting a student. Is this true?" Aisha hesitated before answering. She knew the school had strict policies about financial aid, but she had never imagined they would punish her for helping. "I only wanted to ensure that a bright student didn't lose his education due to circumstances beyond his control," she said firmly. The board members exchanged glances before Mr. Farouk spoke again. That is not your decision to make. We have a reputation to uphold. If we allow one student to receive special treatment, it sets a precedent. Rules are rules. Aisha's heart pounded. So you'd rather see a child's future ruined than allow an exception? Mr. Farouk's expression hardened. Your actions undermine the policies of this institution. Effective immediately, you are dismissed. Aisha sat frozen, struggling to process the words. Just like that, the career she had spent years building was gone. The news spread quickly. Some parents supported her, calling her actions noble, but others sided with the school, believing she had overstepped her role. In the end, she found herself alone, unemployed, and uncertain about her future. Little did she know, the universe had something unexpected in store for her. Aisha walked out of the school gates, her heart heavy with disappointment. The place that had once felt like home now seemed like a distant memory. She had dedicated years of her life to teaching, only to be cast aside for choosing compassion over rules. She spent the next few days applying for teaching positions at different schools, but none were willing to take a teacher who had been dismissed for policy violations. Her savings were running low, and with each rejection, her hope faded. One evening, as she sat on her small balcony staring at the city lights, she received a call from an unknown number. "Hello, is this Miss Aisha?" "Yes, who's speaking?" "My name is Zayn Malik. I'd like to meet you to discuss something important." Aisha frowned. "I'm sorry, but I don't. I heard about what happened at your school. Trust me, you'll want to hear what I have to say." Curious and slightly wary, she agreed to meet him the next day at a local cafe. When she arrived, she immediately recognized Zayn Malik. He was a well-known billionaire, famous for his charitable work in education. His presence was commanding, yet his demeanor was warm and approachable. "Miss Aisha," he greeted her with a smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you." She sat down cautiously. "How do you know about me?" Zayn chuckled. "I have my ways. Your story has been making rounds on social media. People are divided. Some see you as reckless, but others admire your courage. I happen to be one of them." Aisha was taken aback. "You support what I did?" "Of course," he said firmly. "Education should never be denied to someone just because of financial struggles. You took a stand when others wouldn't." She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That means a lot, but unfortunately, standing up for what's right doesn't pay the bills." Zayn leaned forward. "That's why I called you here. I run an educational foundation that builds and funds schools for underprivileged children. We need teachers who are not just qualified, but passionate about making a difference. I believe you're exactly what we're looking for." Aisha's heart raced. "You're offering me a job?" He nodded. "Not just any job. I want you to help me establish a new school. One that welcomes children like Hamza, children who have been cast aside by society's rigid rules." Her mind swirled with emotions. "But I don't have the resources or experience to run a whole school." Zayn smiled. "You have what matters most, the heart of a real teacher. The rest? We'll figure it out together." For the first time in weeks, Aisha felt a spark of hope. The next few months were a whirlwind. With Zayn's financial backing and Aisha's dedication, they began laying the foundation for a school that would be open to all, regardless of their financial situation. She worked tirelessly, selecting a team of teachers who shared her vision. She designed a curriculum that focused not just on academics, but also on personal growth, empathy, and resilience. Despite the challenges, securing permits, hiring staff, and convincing parents to trust a new institution, Aisha pushed forward. She had lost everything, but now she was building something greater than she had ever imagined. One evening, after a long day at the construction site, she received a message from an unknown number. "Miss Aisha, it's Hamza. I heard about your new school. I just wanted to say thank you for everything. I hope I can study there someday." Tears welled in her eyes. "Of course, Hamza. You'll always have a place here." She had once feared that losing her job would be the end of her career. But now she realized it was only the beginning of something extraordinary. The school was finally taking shape. The building, though modest, stood as a symbol of hope. The classrooms were filled with bright murals, the walls echoed with laughter, and every desk held a child eager to learn. For Aisha, it was more than just a school. It was a second chance, a dream realized. But the road ahead was not easy. One afternoon, as she sat in her small office reviewing the school's finances, Zion walked in with a grim expression. "We have a problem," he said, placing a file on her desk. "Funding is running out faster than expected." Aisha frowned, flipping through the documents. "But I thought we had enough for at least a year?" Zion sighed. "We did. But setting up a school from scratch is more expensive than anticipated. Donations have slowed down, and investors are hesitant." A wave of anxiety hit her. What does this mean for the school? If we don't secure additional funding soon, we may have to shut down before we even complete the first academic year. Aisha's heart sank. She had fought so hard to build this, and now it was slipping through her fingers. That night, she couldn't sleep. The thought of telling her students, children who had already faced so much rejection, that their school might close was unbearable. Determined to find a solution, she reached out to every contact she had, seeking sponsors, applying for grants, and even considering crowdfunding. Days turned into weeks, and despite her efforts, the response was discouraging. One evening, as she sat on the school steps, exhausted and disheartened, Hamza approached her. "Miss Aisha, why do you look so sad?" he asked, his small face filled with concern. She forced a smile. "Just a little tired, that's all." He sat beside her. "You know, my mother always says when things get hard, we should never give up. That's what you taught me too, remember?" A lump formed in her throat. Here was this little boy, once abandoned by a system that deemed him unworthy, reminding her of the very lesson she had spent her life teaching. She nodded, ruffling his hair. "You're right, Hamza. We won't give up." The next day, Zion walked into her office, his phone in hand. "I think I found a way to save the school," he said. "But it's risky." Aisha straightened. "I'm listening." "There's a charity gala happening in a few days, an event attended by some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the country. If we can get their attention, we might secure the funding we need." Aisha hesitated. "I've never spoken in front of such a crowd before." Zion gave her an encouraging smile. "You don't have to impress them. You just have to speak from a heart." She took a deep breath and nodded. "Let's do it." The night of the gala was overwhelming. The hall was filled with elegantly dressed guests, chandeliers casting golden light across the room. Aisha felt out of place among them, but she reminded herself why she was here. As she stepped onto the stage, dozens of eyes turned toward her. She gripped the microphone, her hands trembling slightly. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Aisha, and I was once a teacher at an elite private school." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I was fired for helping a student who couldn't afford to pay his fees. That moment changed my life. It made me realize how many children are denied education simply because of financial barriers." She glanced at Zion, who nodded encouragingly. "So, I decided to do something about it. With the support of Mr. Malik, we built a school where every child, regardless of their background, has the right to learn." Her voice wavered as she continued. "But today, I stand before you because that school is in danger of closing. And if it does, these children will once again be left without a future." She looked across the room, meeting the eyes of the guests. "I am not asking for charity. I am asking for belief. Belief that education is not a privilege, it's a right. And, together, we can ensure that right is never taken away from a child again." The room fell silent. Then a single applause echoed, followed by another and another, until the entire hall was filled with applause. Zion stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you believe in this cause, now is the time to act." One by one, people began pledging donations. By the end of the night, they had raised enough to not only keep the school open, but to expand it. Aisha could hardly believe it. What had once seemed like an impossible dream was now a reality. Tears filled her eyes as she turned to Zion. "We did it." He smiled. "No, Aisha, you did it." At that moment, she realized being fired was never the end of her story. It was the beginning of something far greater. The success of the charity gala felt like a miracle. The overwhelming support from donors ensured that the school would not only remain open, but would also have the resources to expand. Aisha felt a newfound hope, believing that this was the turning point she had been waiting for. But challenges weren't over yet. A few weeks later, as the school flourished with new enrollments and improved facilities, an unexpected obstacle arose: opposition from influential private school owners. One morning, Zion entered Aisha's office, his expression serious. "We have a problem," he said, placing a newspaper on her desk. The headline read, "Unregistered School Posing a Threat to Elite Education. Authorities Consider Shutdown." Aisha's heart pounded as she read the article. It painted their school as an illegal institution, misleading the public, and disrupting the education sector by offering unregulated learning. "This is ridiculous. We are offering education to children who have nowhere else to go," she exclaimed. Zion sighed. "The private school owners are feeling threatened. Your speech at the gala got their attention. They know that if more people start supporting free education, their profits will suffer." Aisha clenched her fists. "So they're trying to shut us down?" "Yes." And they filed a formal complaint with the education board. A silence filled the room. Just when she thought things were getting better, another battle was waiting for her. For the next few days, Aisha, Zion, and their legal team worked tirelessly to gather all the necessary documents. They needed to prove that their school met educational standards and had the right to operate. Meanwhile, the smear campaign against them intensified. False rumors spread that the school was unsafe, that the teachers were unqualified, and that students weren't receiving a proper education. Some parents became hesitant, fearing their children's future was at risk. One afternoon, Aisha walked into a nearly empty classroom. Only a few students remained. Others had been pulled out by nervous parents. Tears filled her eyes. "This isn't fair," she whispered. Just then, she heard a familiar voice. "Miss Aisha." She turned to see Hamza standing at the door, holding his books tightly. "Are we going to lose our school?" he asked. She knelt beside him, holding his hands. "No, Hamza. We will fight for it." His eyes sparkled with determination. "Then I'll fight too." Aisha smiled, wiping her tears. She knew what she had to do. Instead of staying silent, Aisha decided to take control of the narrative. She reached out to media outlets, journalists, and social media influencers to tell the real story. The story of the children whose lives had been transformed because of the school. Parents who believed in the school began speaking out. Former students shared their experiences. Videos of children studying, playing, and thriving in their classrooms spread across social media. One video, in particular, went viral: Hamza, standing in front of the school, saying, "This is my school. I used to pick garbage on the streets, but now I know how to read and write. If they close this school, where will we go? Please, don't take away our dreams." The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people voiced their support, demanding that the school remain open. The final decision came down to the education board. Aisha and Zion attended the hearing, where they faced strict questioning. One official asked, "What makes your school different from others? Why should we allow it to operate?" Aisha took a deep breath. "Because we are not just a school. We are a second chance. We are hope. And every child deserves hope." There was silence in the room. Then, after hours of deliberation, the board announced their verdict. The school was officially recognized as a legal institution. Aisha and Zion exchanged a relieved glance. The battle had been won. As they left the building, they were met with cheering students, parents, and supporters who had gathered outside. Hamza ran up to Aisha and hugged her tightly. "We did it, Miss Aisha." Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "Yes, Hamza. We did it." Months passed, and the school continued to flourish. With official recognition from the education board, more donations poured in. The classrooms were expanded, and new teachers were hired. Children who once roamed the streets without hope now had a safe space to learn, grow, and dream. Aisha walked through the bright hallways, watching students engaged in their lessons. Laughter and chatter filled the air. The sight brought warmth to her heart. One day, While organizing some files in her office, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello," she answered. A deep yet familiar voice spoke. "Miss Aisha, this is Mr. Zion." She smiled. "Zion, it's been a while." "Yes. I've been traveling for work, but I have some exciting news. I need you to come to a special event tomorrow." Aisha was curious, but agreed. The next day, she arrived at a luxurious hotel, where a grand charity event was being held. As she walked into the lavish hall, she noticed cameras, reporters, and well-known personalities. Zion greeted her with a proud smile. "You've done so much for those children. It's time the world recognizes your efforts." Before she could respond, the host announced her name. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the woman who changed the lives of hundreds of children, Miss Aisha." The crowd erupted in applause. Aisha hesitantly walked onto the stage. The host continued, "Miss Aisha's selfless work has not only saved a school, but has inspired an entire movement for accessible education. And today, we have a special surprise for her." A large screen lit up behind her, showing video messages from students, parents, and teachers. One by one, they shared their gratitude. "Miss Aisha, because of you, I can read my favorite books. You gave my child a future. Thank you. You are our hero, Miss Aisha." Tears welled up in her eyes. Zion then stepped forward. "That's not all. A generous donor has pledged to fund your school for the next 10 years, ensuring that no child is left without education." Aisha gasped. The crowd cheered. She covered her mouth, unable to believe it. Zion smiled. "And one more thing." He pulled out an envelope and handed it to her. "This is a government approval to expand your school into a full-fledged educational institute. You're not just running a small school anymore. You're building a future for thousands." Aisha's hands trembled as she held the document. She turned to the crowd, her voice filled with emotion. "I started this journey with nothing but a dream. And today, I stand here not alone, but with the love and support of so many. Education is not a privilege, it is a right. And I will dedicate my life to making sure no child is denied that right." The audience gave her a standing ovation. As the event ended, Aisha stepped outside, looking up at the starry sky. She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of fulfillment she had never known before. From being fired to fighting for justice, from losing hope to gaining the support of thousands, her journey had been a testament to the power of resilience and kindness. Hamza's words echoed in her heart. "We did it, Miss Aisha." Yes, they did. And this was just the beginning.